The morning of that fateful day in 2004 began like any other in the small town. The school bell rang, children ran through the gates, their laughter echoing across the yard, and teachers stood at the entrance, calling for students to line up. Among the hundreds of familiar faces were two girls, inseparable since kindergarten. They walked hand in hand, whispering secrets, giggling at private jokes, and radiating the kind of bond that only true best friends share. To their classmates, they were almost like sisters. Everyone was used to seeing them together, always looking out for one another, sharing lunches, walking home side by side. That day was no different, or so it seemed at first. The morning classes went by quickly. The girls, bright and curious, participated eagerly, whispering to each other whenever the teacher's back was turned. During recess, they could be seen sitting on a bench near the schoolyard, munching on snacks and talking about what they planned to do that weekend. A classmate later remembered them saying they wanted to explore a nearby trail after school, but at the time, nobody thought much of it. Children said things like that all the time. The day rolled on, the sun shone brightly over the schoolyard, and everything appeared normal. It was in the afternoon when things began to shift. After the last bell rang, parents gathered outside to collect their children. One by one, students poured out, running to their mothers and fathers, until the crowd slowly thinned. The two girls never came out. At first, people assumed they were delayed, perhaps helping a teacher or stopping by the restroom. Minutes stretched longer, and their parents began scanning the crowd anxiously. Other children assured them they had seen the two leave the classroom, walking together as usual. But there was no sign of them beyond the gates. The teachers quickly checked the building. Classrooms, restrooms, the library, and even the gym were searched. Nothing. Panic began to ripple through the parents gathered outside. The headmaster ordered a full sweep of the school grounds. Volunteers joined in, combing every corner of the yard and nearby streets. Still, no trace. It was as though the girls had vanished into thin air. The parents called the police, and within the hour, officers arrived, cordoning off the school and questioning teachers and students. Descriptions were gathered, and the authorities began their search with dogs and flashlights as dusk settled over the town. Flyers were printed overnight, plastered on every wall, lamppost, and shop window by the next morning. Neighbors opened their doors, attics, and basements, hoping they might somehow find the missing girls. But the search turned up nothing. Whispers started spreading quickly. Some believed the girls had run away together, chasing some childish dream of adventure. Others feared something darker, that someone had lured them away. Children spoke in hushed voices about strangers seen lingering near the school gates in the weeks before. Parents grew more fearful with every passing hour, clutching their children tighter, warning them never to walk alone. The town, once peaceful and quiet, became shrouded in dread. As night fell on that first day, the families gathered in their homes, unable to sleep, their hearts heavy with terror. The mothers clutched photos of their daughters, staring at the smiling faces that had lit up their lives. The fathers paced the rooms, desperate for answers, their helplessness growing with every tick of the clock. Police cars continued to patrol the streets, searchlights swept across fields and forests, but nothing gave a clue to where the two friends had gone. By the second day, the case had already drawn regional attention. News crews arrived, cameras rolling as they captured the tearful pleas of the parents, begging for their daughters to come home. The school hallways, once filled with laughter, were silent and heavy. The empty desks of the girls stood like ghosts in the classroom, a cruel reminder that they had been there only hours before, full of life and innocence. Teachers tried to comfort the other children, but the fear in their own eyes betrayed their words. The mystery of that afternoon lingered like a shadow over the entire community. As hours turned to days, the hope that the girls had simply wandered off began to fade. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Parents in town no longer allowed their children to walk to school alone. Doors were locked earlier, windows checked twice. The town that had always felt safe suddenly seemed hostile, full of hidden dangers. And for the families of the missing friends, the agony was unbearable. Every knock on the door, every ringing phone brought a rush of hope that was shattered moments later when it wasn't news of their daughters. The bond between the two friends made the mystery even more haunting. Everyone knew they would never have left each other, never would have gone anywhere without saying something to someone. Their closeness only deepened the sense that something sinister had happened. And so, the story of their disappearance began to spread beyond the borders of the town, becoming a chilling tale that no one could explain. The first week after the disappearance was chaos. Parents who once gathered at the school gates to exchange smiles and small talk now came with furrowed brows and heavy hearts. The two missing girls were on everyone's lips, every street corner, every shop, every dinner table. Police cars patrolled constantly, officers questioned residents again and again, and volunteers with flashlights combed through nearby woods, riversides, and abandoned buildings. The community was united by fear and hope, but with each fruitless search, that hope grew thinner. The parents of the missing girls became a permanent fixture at the police station. They clung to officers' every word, desperate for even the smallest lead. Detectives sifted through hours of CCTV footage from nearby streets, but the grainy recordings revealed nothing. Dogs followed faint trails that led to the edge of the woods but then stopped cold. Every dead end crushed the families a little more, leaving them grasping for anything to keep their belief alive. Rumors began to spread. Some said they had seen the girls walking near a bus stop, others swore they spotted them at a gas station several towns away. Tips poured in, but each one led nowhere. The police chased every claim, only to return with the same grim answer: no trace. The town, once a place where neighbors trusted one another, started to fracture. Suspicion grew. Who could have done this? A stranger passing through? Or someone closer, someone they all knew? The media descended on the community like vultures. News vans parked outside the school, reporters pressed microphones into the faces of crying mothers, and cameras captured the anguish of families whose lives had been torn apart. The girls' school photos were broadcast on national television, their young, smiling faces staring out at millions of viewers. With every broadcast, the pressure mounted, but still no answers came. Days turned into weeks. The missing posters that once looked fresh and urgent now became weathered, curling at the edges from rain and wind. Yet the parents refused to stop. They organized search parties themselves, printing new flyers, knocking on doors, handing out photographs to strangers at gas stations miles away. Their voices grew hoarse from repeating the same plea: have you seen them? Please, if you know anything, tell us. Candlelight vigils began to take place. The townspeople gathered in front of the school, each holding a flickering flame, singing hymns, and praying for the safe return of the girls. The sight of hundreds of candles glowing in the dark night was haunting, beautiful, and devastating all at once. The parents stood at the front, clutching each other for strength, tears streaming down their faces as they whispered their daughters' names into the silence. But as the weeks dragged on, the whispers of hope slowly turned into murmurs of doubt. People began to ask the questions no one wanted to say aloud. What if the girls weren't coming back? What if something terrible had already happened? These dark thoughts crept into conversations, spreading like poison. For the families, such ideas were unbearable. They refused to accept it. They told themselves that the girls were alive, somewhere, waiting to be found. Months passed, and the case grew colder. Leads dried up, and the number of volunteers dwindled. Life in the town tried to return to normal, but it never really could. Children who once ran freely in the streets were now kept inside. Parents escorted their kids to school and back again, their eyes darting nervously at every unfamiliar face. A sense of paranoia lingered in the air, and the once friendly community felt more like a place under siege. Every anniversary of the disappearance brought the pain back into sharp focus. On those days, the families organized gatherings at the schoolyard, releasing balloons into the sky with messages written to their daughters. They refused to let their memories fade. Teachers left the girls' desks untouched in the classroom, a painful reminder of the empty spaces they left behind. The other children grew up, moved on to higher grades, but those desks remained as though time itself had frozen for the missing friends. The parents lived in a constant state of waiting. Every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call made their hearts leap, only for the crushing disappointment to follow when it wasn't news about their daughters. Sleep became a stranger to them, replaced by endless nights staring at photographs, wondering where they had gone and whether they were safe. The bond between the two families grew stronger, bound together by the same agony. They leaned on each other, because no one else could truly understand the depth of their pain. As the years inched forward, the case became a haunting memory for many in town, but for the families, it was never over. They clung desperately to any story they heard of missing children found alive after years. Those rare miracles gave them strength, even if only for a little while. They refused to believe their daughter's story would end in tragedy. And so, the searching never stopped, the waiting never ended, and the empty desks in the school remained a wound that time refused to heal. The silence that followed the first year was almost worse than the chaos. At least in the beginning there had been movement, sirens, search parties, news cameras, and constant questions. Now there was nothing but an aching void. The case of the two missing friends sat in the police files with no new evidence, no new witnesses, no progress. For the families, each day was like living in slow motion, stuck in a nightmare they could not wake from. 8 years is a long time, but for parents waiting on their missing children, it felt like yesterday and forever all at once. The town gradually adjusted, though it was never the same. People stopped talking about it openly, but the memory hovered in the background like a ghost. The school moved on with new students filling the classrooms, but the desks of the two girls remained untouched for years, gathering dust before eventually being reassigned. Still, those who had been their classmates never forgot. Some carried guilt, wondering if they had missed a sign, a clue, anything that could have saved them. Teachers sometimes caught themselves expecting to see the girls' hands raised during lessons, only to be pierced again by the sharp truth that they were gone. For the parents, the silence was torment. They lived on rumors, each one like a fragile lifeline. A child spotted at a rest stop who looked similar. A girl seen with an older man in another state. A runaway reported in the newspaper. Each possibility reignited hope, and each disappointment tore them back down. They became familiar faces in police stations, asking for updates, begging detectives to reopen leads, pleading for more resources. The police, sympathetic but increasingly powerless, could only say the same thing: there was nothing new. The years weighed heavily on the family's relationships. Some friendships broke under the strain. Some marriages cracked, as grief and unanswered questions built walls between husbands and wives. Others grew stronger, united by shared suffering and the refusal to let go of hope. The bond between the two sets of parents never faltered. They were bound forever by their daughter's friendship and their mutual grief. They attended every vigil together, every anniversary memorial, every community prayer circle. They became symbols of endurance in the town, though privately their strength was born only from necessity. The girl's absence became a cruel marker of time. Every birthday was agony. Cakes with unblown candles, empty chairs at family gatherings, unopened presents that sat collecting dust in closets. When friends of the girls celebrated milestones, graduations, first jobs, even weddings, the contrast was unbearable. The missing girls would never experience those joys, and their families were forced to imagine what might have been. What would they look like as teenagers? Would they still be inseparable? These questions lingered, unanswerable, gnawing at the parents' hearts. Meanwhile, the town itself developed scars that never healed. Parents kept their children close, curfews became stricter, and the carefree days of playing outside until dark disappeared. Stories of the missing friends were passed down to younger students who hadn't even been born in 2004. The disappearance became part of local folklore, retold in hushed voices by teenagers daring each other to walk near the school at night or venture to the wooded areas where the search had once focused. Fear had become tradition. Despite everything, the families refused to declare the girls dead. They resisted every suggestion to move on. For them, moving on meant surrendering, and they would not surrender. They attended missing persons conferences, connected with other families across the country, and kept their daughters' faces alive in every database and every organization that specialized in cold cases. They distributed age progression photos, showing what their girls might look like now. They clung desperately to the thought that somewhere, somehow, the girls were still alive, waiting to come home. As the 8th year approached, the weight of time was nearly unbearable. Hope was still there, but it was worn down, fragile, flickering like a candle in the wind. Some in the community had quietly resigned themselves to tragedy, but the families refused to give in. Each new day was another chance, another possibility that the phone might ring with news. They prayed constantly, their hearts aching with both faith and doubt, knowing that miracles were rare but not impossible. And then came the fire. It began as a simple blaze, tearing through dry grass and abandoned fields, something the townspeople thought would be contained and forgotten in a matter of hours. But as the smoke cleared and the charred ground was revealed, something unexpected caught the eye of the firefighters and investigators who arrived. The silence of 8 years was about to be shattered, and the mystery that had haunted the town would finally begin to unravel. The summer of 2012 was hot, the kind of heat that baked the earth dry and left fields brittle like paper. Farmers prayed for rain, children stayed indoors, and the grass in the abandoned field on the edge of town turned a dull, lifeless yellow. Nobody gave the place much thought anymore. It had been empty for years, just a stretch of weeds, brush, and forgotten soil. But one late afternoon, a spark, whether from a careless cigarette, a piece of broken glass catching the sun, or something else entirely, turned that neglected field into the center of attention once again. The fire started small, a thin line of smoke curling upward into the sky. Within minutes, the dry weeds caught, and flames spread hungrily across the land. Dark plumes rose higher, visible from miles away, and sirens soon filled the air. Fire trucks roared through the streets, their lights flashing, as townspeople gathered at a distance, watching in fear as the blaze consumed the forgotten field. The smell of smoke mixed with ash drifted over the town, clinging to clothes and hair, seeping into every corner. Firefighters worked for hours, battling the flames that leapt and crackled in the hot wind. Water hissed against the scorched earth, smoke billowed in clouds, and finally, as evening settled in, the fire gave way. The field was blackened, stripped of its cover, and what had once been hidden beneath layers of weeds and thyme was now laid bare. At first, nobody noticed. The firefighters focused on ensuring the embers wouldn't reignite. But one of them, sweeping through the charred ground with his boot, stopped suddenly. He bent down, his gloved hand brushing away the ash, and revealed something strange, metal glinting faintly under the fading sun. Word spread quickly. Investigators were called to the scene, tape went up, and what had begun as just another summer fire turned into something far more sinister. Beneath the burned grass and soot, the outline of something unnatural appeared. It was not farm equipment, not a piece of trash, but an object buried deliberately, hidden for years until the flames had exposed it. The field, once dismissed as useless land, became the focus of a new kind of attention. As the soil was disturbed, the onlookers, some of them the very same who had searched desperately 8 years before, felt their stomachs tighten. Parents of the missing girls rushed to the site, held back by officers who warned them it was too soon to know anything. But in their hearts, they felt it. Something about the timing, the location, the way the earth seemed to give up its secret only now, after years of silence, told them that this discovery was tied to their daughters. The investigators worked into the night. Floodlights were set up, casting eerie white beams across the blackened field. Every shovel of dirt revealed more. Strange fragments began to surface, scraps of fabric, rusted metal, and bones too small to belong to animals. Each piece was catalogued, bagged, and carried away carefully, as though the earth itself was finally whispering the truth it had hidden for nearly a decade. The townspeople stood silently at the edges, their faces pale, their whispers low. They remembered the searches that had passed near this very spot, the nights spent combing the woods just beyond the field. They had walked past this place countless times, never knowing what lay beneath. The idea that the answer to their haunting mystery had been here all along filled them with a mix of horror and disbelief. For the parents, it was unbearable to watch. They clutched photographs of their daughters, tears streaking their faces as the lights in the field flickered and shadows stretched across the ground. Every sound of a shovel hitting earth made their hearts pound harder. Each time investigators carried a small evidence bag to the waiting van, hope twisted violently with dread. They had prayed for answers for 8 years, but now, faced with the possibility of truth, they weren't sure they wanted to know. By dawn, the site had transformed into a crime scene. The charred grass was dotted with markers, the soil cut into neat sections for examination. Reporters once again descended on the town, cameras capturing the grim faces of officers, the sobbing families, and the eerie emptiness of the field. Headlines began to spread, "Fire reveals possible clues in cold case." For the rest of the world, it was a mystery reignited. For the families, it was the reopening of a wound that had never healed. The investigators promised thorough work, but they cautioned patience. It would take time to analyze everything, to confirm identities, to piece together how the evidence had come to rest there. Time was something the parents both dreaded and desperately needed. They wanted answers immediately, but they also feared what those answers would mean. Were they about to discover the fate of their daughters? Or would this be another cruel false lead, another painful dead end? As the sun rose higher and the ashes of the fire cooled, the town realized it stood on the edge of truth. The flames had burned away more than just dry grass, they had stripped away years of silence, revealing secrets that no one could ignore anymore. Something had been buried in that field, and now it was coming back into the light. When the fire had finished its brutal work and the smoke cleared, the blackened field looked like a graveyard. What once had been overgrown and forgotten was now laid bare, and the investigators returned with fresh determination. They cordoned off the entire area, blocking curious onlookers from coming too close. The air still smelled of ash, but underneath it hung something heavier, something almost metallic, as shovels cut into the soil. What they began to unearth would change the town forever. The first discoveries were fragments, small pieces of fabric buried deep in the earth. At first glance, they seemed unremarkable, torn, faded, discolored from time. But when laid out under the floodlights, the colors began to show through. A pattern that resembled the floral print of a dress, the faint stitching of a child's jacket. Some of the townspeople gasped when they saw, for they remembered those very clothes from photographs that had been plastered across every wall 8 years ago. The parents recognized them instantly. A mother collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands clutching the air as if trying to reach for the little girl who had once worn that dress. Then came the bones. At first small pieces, brittle and fragile, then larger fragments that left no doubt about their nature. Investigators moved carefully, brushing away dirt with gloved hands, whispering instructions to one another. The parents, though kept at a distance, felt their souls shatter with every evidence bag carried past them. They had begged for answers for so long, but now, faced with what the earth was revealing, they wished desperately that the mystery had remained unsolved. The two families stood side by side, trembling, their tears blending with the soot that still floated in the air. They didn't speak much, words were useless in the face of such devastation. One father's face was rigid with silent agony, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Another mother kept muttering her daughter's name as though saying it aloud might somehow bring her back. The cruelty of it all, that the girls had been buried here, so close to the school they once loved, so close to where they had vanished, was unbearable. The fire had stripped away the disguise of weeds and brush, but the ground itself seemed soaked in sorrow. The investigators worked through the night, piecing together the remains of what had been hidden for nearly a decade. They uncovered more clothing, hair tangled in the soil, and even small personal items, charms from a bracelet, a broken hair clip, a button shaped like a heart. Each discovery was a dagger to the parents' hearts. These were the belongings their daughters had once cherished, carried proudly, and now they lay in the dirt as relics of an innocence stolen. The town gathered silently at the edges of the field, candles appearing in the hands of neighbors who could do nothing else. Reporters broadcast the unfolding scene, but even they struggled to capture the weight of the moment. This was not just a cold case warming up again, this was grief made tangible, proof of lives cut short. As dawn broke, the official word came from the investigators. While tests would be needed to confirm everything, there was little doubt. The field was the final resting place of the two missing friends. The word struck like thunder. Parents collapsed to the ground, sobbing, holding one another up as neighbors wept beside them. 8 years of waiting had come to an end, not with a reunion, not with a miracle, but with the cruel confirmation of what so many had feared. The entire community felt the weight of the discovery. For years, people had clung to hope, however faint, that the girls might one day walk back into town. Now, that hope was gone, replaced by the heavy truth of tragedy. The once quiet field became sacred ground, covered in flowers, toys, and handwritten notes left by townspeople who could not hold back their sorrow. Children who had once been classmates, now young adults, stood in silence, their eyes filled with guilt and grief. The parents, shattered but resolute, spoke only once to the waiting cameras. Their voices cracked, their words broken by sobs, but they made a promise: their daughters' names would not be forgotten. They demanded answers, justice, and the truth of who had done this and why. They would not let the case die again, not after the fire had forced its secrets into the open. As night fell once more, the field glowed, not with flames this time, but with candles placed carefully in the soil. The smoke had carried away the last disguise, and now the earth revealed its cruel secret. What was once hidden in silence had finally spoken, and though the truth broke their hearts, the families knew